Boris isn't convinced. Yeah, don't think anybody's convinced. At the
At
moment,
least
we can go very far.
At least Barry, what Ireland's doing is provides us with a template which we can just copy.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Mm.
Although they're members of the EU, so that's probably not what we'd want to do.
And isn't their Prime Minister is a qualified doctor rather than a failed
It's really interesting when you look at the surveys which break down lockup performance by size of firm. So sole practitioners are invariably the best at recovering debts. Every survey that you ever see, 2 to 4 partners are not quite so good, but they're not bad. And it sort of stretches out. It's almost as if it's no longer my money when you're in a 5-8 partner firm.
Yes.
And it gets even worse in the 10 to 20 partners. And then professional management cuts in.
Yeah.
And the larger firms are also, they have systems, they have processes, they have people who are paid to do this and who are measured on their performance and all that kind of stuff. And it cuts back in. But this sort of personal connection between it being my money or being some kind of amorphous partnership pot.
Yeah, that's what I think. If you're a sole practitioner, I used to be a sole practitioner many years ago, and you learn that until you've sold the job, delivered it well, billed it, and collected it, you can't then go out and spend it, and that does focus the mind quite nicely.
Yeah. Well, should we kick off with the cash flow? And what I was going to an extent, kick off with. Is my concern. I think I've been concerned for the last month that we're going to start seeing a lot of redundancies as soon as we get to the end of the furloughing arrangement and furloughing scheme. And pretty well every client I've spoken to in the last few weeks is saying, yeah, we've had a bit of fat on the bone. We're now going to be starting to make the redundancy process. Even if they've got good businesses, I think they're saying enough's enough. Furloughing's got to continue, otherwise we are going to make redundancies, and cash is slow.
There's some stuff in the newspapers the other day about not just in law but across business that's going to happen, and the redundancies.
I think the phrase there is that leaders should never waste a good crisis. Because it gives you permission to do things that you would never normally get through.
Wonderful comment there, Barry. I was thinking. That's what I was thinking, but
it's not original, I promise you.
But it's a great way of saying it. I nearly said to a client last week, well, now's the easy time to do it because people will be expecting redundancy. They're expecting the difficult time.
I think, obviously it's about your business and whether or not, if you think you've got a really strong business and you can use the crisis as an opportunity to grow. Because if you think you've got a stronger business than your competitors and you might actually take work on from them, you could also argue it that, well, let's keep the good staff we've got, assuming they're good staff and they're well trained and they're loyal and you've looked after them well during the crisis. We're then set up to move on. So you can always look at these things two ways. But I think it will be a case of people going, you know what, I suddenly realized that these 3 people have been furloughed and the business is working perfectly well, and I'm not noticing they're there. And if you've got, you're not looking to grow, then maybe it is an opportunity to cut your costs.
I think that's absolutely right, Mark. And I think I've spoken to at least a couple of clients in the last week or so that had spent much of the last 12 months recruiting to build capacity. And now need to sweat the asset. They've got taken too many staff on for the work they've got, and I think whether they have CBIL loans come through or not, I think redundancies are in the minds of most. Not necessarily at swinging levels, but taking out the excess.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe seeing who's stepped up to the crisis well, put themselves out, and has added value, and who hasn't.
And I think you talk about the CBILS loans there, Nigel. I'm not seeing an awful lot coming through as yet. I suspect there are some in the pipeline, but I still think there are problems between the frontline managers and the back office, and dare I say, the Bank of England throughout the government in terms of breaking through the admin bureaucracy and the desire to actually deal with it all.
Did you see Howard? Howard, did you see the very bizarre announcement that came from the government last week, which said that they will no longer require the banks to have cash flow forecasts in order to justify a CBILS loan?
Really, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it actually came through. Somebody sent it to me on a actually from the Institute of Chartered Accountants, but it was a commenting on a government statement. But to me, that's what they said was the banks can rely on their existing knowledge of their customers because they know them. But so somebody said to me, well, I don't need to do a forecast. I said, right, great. How much are you going to ask for, and how do you know how much to ask for? As a matter of interest, how on earth would the bank know whether to approve your loan without knowing how much you need and how you're going to repay it? So
that's the key bit, isn't it? The repayment.
If we're talking about cash flow, the one thing that is absolutely at the forefront of my thinking at the moment with just about everybody I'm talking to is, okay, so what does your forecast say? How far have you got ahead? And the other point that I think something that's sort of crept up on us, I probably started doing about 5 or 6 years ago, but the thing that has now become de rigueur in the turnaround community is the 13-week cash flow. It's almost becoming the standard template, because 13 weeks covers in normal terms a VAT cycle. I know we've all got the forgiveness in this quarter, and it covers a rent cycle. So in that time period, normally you're going to see your peak requirements and to see how much headroom you've really got. And I think the one message that I'm saying is there are firms now who are having to look at cash flow, who frankly have solved it in previous times by having lots of money in the bank and not having to worry about it. Whereas the short-term hit, the next 3-4 months, are going to be so severe in many firms that even firms that have never thought about cash flow in the past are going to have to look at it very, very, very seriously now.
Yes,
so,
that's right.
Yeah, particularly after having got over, in my experience, a couple of clients collecting the low-hanging fruit, that they were concerned about cash in the early days, made a big effort to collect that cash. That's come through, and they're going to be left with the difficult debts now, which are going to take longer to collect and all become bad.
Yeah, well, I think there's going to be a lot more debts that become bad, aren't there? Because the ones that have not been there for 3 months, not been paid for 3 months, possibly because those firms were struggling, clients, poor run businesses are the ones that won't survive.
The other point that I would make, and particularly to any partnerships who end up watching this, is the first quarter of next year promises to be absolutely dreadful from a cash flow point of view, because there will be 2 lots of partnership tax to pay in January. There's a deferral from this July, and there will be 2 lots of VAT to pay on the current the way the government has structured things at the moment, with March the 31st being the catch-up date for the VAT. That seems to me to be predicated on this mythical V-shaped recession and everything being back to normal by then. I really do wonder whether the government's going to have to end up having a portal for time to pay arrangements, because there will be so many people who are simply not in a position to pay that.
I think you're right. Throughout, I've thought it's this next month or so, and then next January, February, March. Well, next January is going to be the big problem.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.
Okay.
Bye.